Hi, Max Brantley with the Arkansas Times on Wednesday, February the 7th. Let's start with some local news today. A lawsuit was filed in Pulaski Circuit Court today challenging the constitutionality of the 2017 law that tried to reinstitute a requirement that you produce a voter ID to be allowed to vote. The lawyer who filed this suit, Jeff Preby, it's a citizen's action, says that this law really is no different than the law struck down in 2014, which held that the state constitution says you can't add additional requirements to be able to vote. The legislature will argue that this is something to do with the registration amendment in the Constitution, but it's nothing but the same old new addition, which the previous Supreme Court said you couldn't do. The Supreme Court membership has changed a great deal since then, however. Preby would like to see this lawsuit stop the use of voter ID in the primary election this year. So there'll be a hearing soon. The case was assigned to Alice Gray in Pulaski County. Elsewhere, we learned this morning that Lisa Spear, the state historian, director of the state archives, resigned yesterday at the end of the day abruptly. She said she wasn't fired and she wasn't forced to resign, but it was clear, she made clear in a very careful way, that this was because of differences with Stacy Hurst, the director of the state Department of Arkansas Heritage, which took over the archives after Asa Hutchinson became governor and neutered the State History Commission. Stacy Hurst is a micromanager. She doesn't understand the agency very well. She's forced a lot of people out who were veterans at what they did. Lisa Spear was a well-qualified archivist with a long history. Stacy Hurst came into the job with virtually no historic preservation experience, helped run a flower shop with her husband. There's going to be more to come on this. Hurst has designs on the Black History Commission, wants to do to it what she did to the State History Commission. Black legislators aren't happy about it. There's a meeting with the governor planned. Tom Dillard, the historian, says Stacy Hurst should resign her job. He's calling an emergency meeting of the state's significant historical community to get Governor Hutchinson to do something about a director who's driven a wedge between the state and the historic community. Interesting story. Perhaps small stuff, but not to the people who spend their time in the state archives. Well, we learned also today that the Arkansas State Supreme Court is running a heck of a legal bill defending itself in a lawsuit that never had to be filed if the Supreme Court hadn't thrown Wendell Griffin off of all death penalty cases, and in a pretty injudicious move because it wasn't happy with the decision he entered in a property rights case over drugs used in executions. He's suing them in federal court. That case has not been thrown out of court yet, so it's relevant. The Supreme Court has hired lawyers to defend themselves. The Attorney General has recused, and they've spent $135,000 so far and have asked the Joint Budget Committee for another $500,000 over the next 2 years if this case drags on. The interesting thing is that a number of the justices are not content to use a single lawyer hired by Chief Justice Dan Kemp, but have hired lawyers of their own, expensive guys from New York and Washington. You can bet the Supreme Court doesn't approve the kind of fees they're asking the state to pay when attorneys for indigent clients ask for fees in criminal cases and small civil cases. Kenton Buckner, the Little Rock Police Chief, gave an interview yesterday to the media in Charleston, South Carolina about his seeking of the Charleston Police Chief job. He said his troubles with black officers here were just a speed bump, just a continuation of their long complaints about the police agency. He said he's made improvements in race relations here. He has said he has great media relations. That'll come as a surprise to some in the media, I think. And he also said something interesting. He said that the Power Ultra Lounge shooting when 25 people were wounded by gunshots was an illustration of what a great job police do, because though 25 people were wounded, none died. I think all the shootings occurred before the police arrived. I think they did do a good job on emergency treatment, but it was kind of a strange thing to say to bolster your bid for a job in another state. Big news in the Arkansas Supreme Court continues on the issue of whether you can sue the state or not. The Supreme Court's going to hear oral arguments in a case brought by an owner of Burger King in which the state is now saying that he can't sue them over his contest of a tax they've assessed on him for a fringe benefit he implies to employees. Is it really true? Can you really not sue the state over anything? There's a case that the state's arguing that over a driver's license issue up in Pope County. There's just any number of ways. If the state cannot be sued over anything, does that mean that some state bureaucrat over a tax matter, a driver's matter, or something else is the final word on any dealing with state government? I understand Governor Asa Hutchinson doesn't really view the law this way, but until the state Supreme Court sends a different signal, that is going to be the law. An amendment to give the clear power to the state legislature to waive sovereign immunity, so-called, in some cases, and allow the state to be sued, was rejected yesterday by Attorney General Leslie Rutledge. She said the ballot title was ambiguous and needed to be improved. We'll see if she'll let anything go on eventually. Andrew Collins has announced for House District 35, that's a seat vacated by Clark Tucker in Little Rock, a Democrat who's running for Congress. A citizens group headed by Russ Rakoff, the blogger, and Thorn in the City's side, has complained that city directors are deleting emails so they don't have to respond to Freedom of Information Act requests. They want a criminal investigation by a special prosecutor. City Attorney Tom Carpenter said there's no rules on record retention, and if city directors use their personal accounts and delete mail, well, they can delete mail just as long as they don't do it for the purpose of not complying with an information request. Here's news in the world that starts in Arkansas. A man named Matt Maddox from Mena, Arkansas, tops in his class in high school, was named today as the Chief Executive Officer of Wynn Resorts. That's a multi-billion-dollar worldwide resort and gambling corporation that had been headed by Steve Wynn, who's now in trouble over sexual abuse complaints that could threaten some of those casino licenses. Matt Maddox has worked there for years. He's made as much as $17 million in 1 year as a chief operating officer, so he's been there a good while. He's a grandson of a longtime legislator, Ode Maddox, and brother of John Maddox, who's a current member of the Arkansas House. So we can say we knew him when. And finally this, what's a day without a little bit about Donald Trump? It looks like Donald Trump is hot to have a big, huge military parade thrown in Washington. Dang the cost. It may cost $22 million, according to one estimate, could tear up streets with big tanks rumbling down Pennsylvania Avenue. He says this is to show our respect for the troops. What it is to have the military pay obedience to Donald Trump. Sounds a little bit more like North Korea and Russia every day, but of course he is an admirer of Vladimir Putin. That's the news today. Keep resisting. I'm Max Brantley.